politics should end right here and right now.
I'm a little disappointed, to be clear.
Ohioans United for Reproductive Rights passed Issue 1 and put Ohioans back in charge of their decisions about pregnancy and abortion.
Nikki's running in the moderate lane and the never Trump lane, and frankly, that will not unite our party. Ron has done a good job as a governor of Florida, but at the end, his campaign has been stuttering and stammering.
Hello, I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to a special hour-long edition of America Decides. Let's remind ourselves of this basic fact. Polls measure preferences. Elections measure behavior. Preferences are fluid. Elections are behavior that confers authority. Polls can and sometimes do capture a direction, or, as they sometimes do, miss it by a wide margin. Elections, by contrast, declare hard choices, this or that. And yesterday, from Virginia to Kentucky, Pennsylvania to Ohio, the news was not good for one party. You know which party and you know who leads to it. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, something much more important. Here's Republican Daniel Cameron last night after losing his race to Kentucky's Democratic governor, Andy Beshear.
As I called the governor to congratulate him, I know from his perspective and from all of our perspectives that we all want the same thing for our future generations. We want a better Commonwealth, one in which it can ultimately be a shining city on a hill, a model and example for the rest of the nation to follow.
And this is Brandon Presley after losing to Mississippi's Republican Governor Tate Reeves.
He deserves a congratulation on his victory. This state depends on leadership for the next 4 years on tough issues and things in which we need to see our state move forward. And I give him my best wishes to he and Ely and to his family. I respect the decision of the voters of Mississippi because that's what makes our democracy what it actually is.
Cameron lost his race by about 67,000 votes. Presley lost his by about 38,000 votes. Both conceded. Former President Donald Trump in 2020 lost Michigan by 154,000 votes and has never conceded. He lost Pennsylvania in 2020 by 80,000 votes and has never conceded. Let that contrast and what it says about politics then and now sink in. Let us continue. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes joins us now to talk about the election yesterday. Particularly, Nancy, how the White House views it. Is this yet another moment where the Biden White House says, hello, we told you so?
That is what they are screaming from the mountaintops, Major, and from every social media outlet there is. This is a huge sigh of relief for the White House. They are arguing we were never concerned. We always knew the voters were on our side and that elections are really what matters at the end of the day. Polls are not predictors 1 year out from the 2024 election, they argue, but these elections show that voters are still on their side. Now, there's still no question that President Biden is underwater when it comes to his approval ratings. He's looking at a slew of polls, recent polls that show him down in key battleground states, but they can take heart from the fact that issues like abortion are still very potent and appear to be driving turnout among Democrats. That's a big a sign of relief for them.
Let's pick up on that thread about abortion because we have new CBS News polling that finds 54% of likely Republican primary voters oppose, keyword, oppose a federal law making abortion illegal. What does that tell you about where the Republicans are and what Democrats not only saw yesterday, but also saw in 2022?
Well, let's just take Ohio, for example, a red state, a state that former President Trump won in 2020, I think 55% of the vote. A measure yesterday on the ballot, issue 1, which enshrined abortion rights in the Constitution of that state, got 57% of the vote. So in a red state, it won handily. That shows you that polling on this issue and public sentiment on this issue has really shifted in a marked way since Roe v. Wade was overturned. We now have 7 ballot measures in 7 different states, all telling us the same thing, which is that even individuals who in their own personal life may be opposed to abortion also oppose those rights being stripped away from others. And it is now a majority position in this country in favor of keeping abortion rights where they were.
Whatever poker face the White House possesses this morning, there were Democrats who were nervous that I talked to on Monday.
Absolutely.
Not only about the slew of polls over the weekend that were very downbeat for the president's reelection campaign, but also not exactly sure how Tuesday would play out. And one of the things they were most worried about, Nancy, and I wonder if you picked this up at the White House, is if Tuesday had gone in a different way, had gone more Republican, it would have weakened the president, not necessarily for 2024, but in the immediate negotiations that have to go on with Republicans now about keeping the government open, Ukraine aid, Israel, border security, and the like. Does the White House feel a little bit more fortified now, a little stronger in that negotiating posture?
Such a good point. In fact, the vice president herself kind of made a rare appearance amongst the press corps today, did not take any questions, but she did stop and sort of do a little bit of a victory lap and claim that you don't have to abandon your beliefs, your religious beliefs or your deeply held political beliefs in order to be on our side on this particular issue of abortion. And more broadly, when you look at the results in a state like Virginia, which is so often, as you know, seen as a bellwether, because they hold their elections in off years, it's often seen as a predictor of what might happen the following year in a presidential election. Democrats were worried about being able to hold on to the Senate. Instead, they not only held on to the Senate, but they flipped the state legislature and put that governor in a weaker position than many had anticipated he would be in today.
Nancy Cordes, always great to see you. Thank you so very much. As you might have heard, 5 Republican presidential candidates are gearing up for the 3rd GOP debate tonight in Miami. But the GOP frontrunner, you know his name, former President Donald Trump, again will not be on stage. Robert Costa and Ed O'Keefe join us now. Robert, as you well know, CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent. Ed, also, as you similarly well know, CBS News' senior White House and political correspondent. So let us start with you, Bob Costa. Have in any way the election results from Tuesday cast a pall or in any way affected the atmosphere or sense of Republicans in Miami heading into tonight's debate?
Major, it's great to be with you. It's great to be with Ed, who's just down the road covering former President Trump. But I'm here for those on stage tonight. This is a real moment about abortion rights and how the party's going to move forward in terms of restrictions. You have Florida Governor Ron DeSantis for months now, ever since the Florida legislature passed the law, has been articulating his view that he supports a 6-week ban on abortion. But last night, as we all have been covering, Virginia Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin and his allies, they got a pushback from the voters on his proposal for a 15-week ban in Virginia. So you can expect some debate tonight, some actual policy debate about where the Republican Party needs to go on abortion rights. Should it continue to put it front and center like Governor Youngkin did, or should they try to reframe the party message in 2024 and put President Biden's economic message, that so-called Bidenomics agenda outlined by the White House, does that become the target point versus moving on the abortion front?
And you mentioned that Ed O'Keefe is down the road from you. Ed O'Keefe is in Hialeah covering former President Trump's counter-programming event tonight. He will be there, I think, to gather at least one somewhat important endorsement and to give his own assessment of what happened on election night. Ed, what are you picking up about what the former president might do or say this evening?
We might hear a little bit about last night, Major. I will be listening, especially to hear if we hear anything from him regarding abortion and the fact that that issue was defeated in Ohio and was a factor in those Republican losses in Virginia. But perhaps more immediately, will he say anything tonight about the ongoing conflicts in Israel and Ukraine and whether Congress should be working with the White House on sorting that out? He has been far more outspoken in expressing concern about ongoing military engagement, especially in Ukraine. But does he support, does he continue to amplify and push for the strategy that Speaker Johnson has adopted to require that Israeli funding be offset by something else and, in essence, slow down the money getting to Israel? Because remember, lawmakers are more likely to be taking cues from the guy who speaks here tonight than the guys that speak down the street in downtown Miami. He's got about, he'll probably hit four figures in terms of a crowd here tonight, which would be about what is going to see the five other contenders in the Opera House in downtown Miami. His son, Don Jr., is here, among others, Kerry Lake, the Arizona Senate candidate, and as you mentioned, Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders set to finally endorse him. The Trump world has been waiting for this endorsement, not terribly pleased that it's taken this long, given that she, of course, was the next most visible face in the Trump administration after him. But the governor now coming here to Florida tonight to offer her endorsement in what really is the heart of South Florida Trump country, Hialeah, Cuban-American, Venezuelan-American community, where a lot of the change in this state politically began because they liked what he was saying about the fears of socialism and how Democrats were embracing that ideology. That word, of course, remember, rings so much more with this community, given what they fled in Cuba, Venezuela, and other parts of Latin America, Major.
Robert Costa, let me ask you, what is the sense this evening, heading into this debate, about how much this evening's presentation will be about a clash between Nikki Haley and Governor DeSantis?
Well, that's the talk here among so many Republican strategists, that it's going to be about Governor Haley and Governor DeSantis, though don't say that to allies of former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie and others on stage who say, hey, this race is fluid. It's not just about DeSantis and Haley. But after Governor DeSantis got the endorsement of Iowa Republican Governor Kim Reynolds in recent weeks, there's now a play to see who's going to start to really make some movement in New Hampshire. And I just sat down this week with New Hampshire's Republican Governor Chris Sununu, and he said he's still weighing his own endorsement. So you can expect tonight the nation is watching, at least some Republican voters will be watching this on another network. And at the same time, New Hampshire's governor will certainly be watching this and keeping an eye on the DeSantis-Haley dynamic that you outlined.
And Robert, sticking with you for just 1 second, there is a sentiment among those who still support South Carolina Republican Senator Tim Scott that if there is tonight a rancorous clash between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, that will create an opening, possibly one that can be exploited by Tim Scott. Is that something you're going to look for as well?
Yes. I mean, an opening in what sense is the real question. For the entire year, former President Donald Trump has dominated the race, not just put aside polls. He's dominated the conversation with voters. He's getting so much attention as he faces 5 ongoing trials. So you might have an opening in the sense of an opening among those who are on this debate stage tonight to become maybe seen as the more viable alternative to Trump. But as a political reporter, I want to know who's going to break through against Trump. Now, that doesn't mean you necessarily take on the former president, but who is going to, at this late hour, it's already November, Thanksgiving's around the corner, who's going to come across as a credible, viable Trump alternative and a credible, viable Republican nominee at this point who's not named Trump? And that's a question I'm not just asking, but donors are asking, who I'm calling all the time. And they say if someone doesn't emerge soon, they may just accept that Trump's going to be the presumptive nominee.
And Ed O'Keefe, back to you. And you talked to us a moment ago about the significance of Hialeah, the significance of the transformation in Miami-Dade County. Is it part and parcel of the reason the former president is there tonight to say, you see, folks, whatever all this other conversation on the debate stage is about, I'm not only the present of this party, I'm the future of this party, and Hialeah is one of the places to look at that transformation.
And not only that, but I'm the guy chipping away at President Biden's dominance and the Democratic Party's dominance with Latino voters, with black voters, with other elements of the Democratic Party coalition who, for whatever reason, seem increasingly interested in the former president. So, yes, he's as likely to focus on that tonight as everything else. Watch especially for what he might say about the economy and how it's affecting Latino families. You've seen in our polling, in the New York Times polling that was done as well, growing concern about how inflation is affecting Latino and black households. And so you'll see a little conversation about that. As to your earlier point about who else might break through, as Bob said, who would it be? Good question, but this camp is still watching those three. DeSantis, Haley, and Scott. They know he's most vulnerable in Iowa. They know that those 3 other candidates are the ones that could be factors in Iowa. They still anticipate a win. The question will be by how much. And if somebody gets close enough, does it vault them into New Hampshire where you have a completely different voter mix? and then down to South Carolina, where Nikki Haley and Tim Scott, of course, are South Carolina natives and could have a built-in advantage. So they're watching, even though they'd much prefer that Republicans pay attention to what he does here at this football stadium tonight.
Our thanks to Ed O'Keefe in Hialeah and Robert Costa in Miami. Last night brought key victories for Democrats more or less across the country. What it could mean for the Biden-Harris campaign. That's next. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. The Biden re-election campaign is celebrating, well, let's be honest, really celebrating last night's victories because Democrats won almost everywhere across the country. They were so happy about it. Vice President Kamala Harris came out to the West Wing, talked to reporters, and had this to say about the president's bid for re-election.
It was a good night, and the president and I obviously have a lot of work to do to earn our re-election, but I am confident we're going to win.
Principal Deputy Campaign Manager for the Biden re-election campaign, Quentin Folks, joins us now. Quentin, your assessment about the most important takeaway from last night. I'm sure you can find many things that encourage you, but if you were to identify the most important, what would it be?
Republicans have drastically underestimated the American public, and they are out of touch with them. The MAGA agenda failed last night. They have underestimated the Biden-Harris agenda. And they've underestimated Americans' willingness to turn out to protect their democracy.
Is that most visible in Virginia or Ohio or Kentucky?
I think it's most visible all across the country. I mean, what we saw is voters turn out in numbers to protect a woman's right to choose in stark contrast. I think what we saw in Kentucky is Daniel Cameron and Republican groups spent $30 million to try to go after President Biden's agenda, and it failed. And I think that they have underestimated the American public and that voters understand what's at stake. And they're turning out to vote for Democrats who are running on the Biden-Harris agenda. I think that that's the thoroughfare that we have through all of these elections, is that the same issues that we saw last night are the same issues that propelled the president and the vice president to victory in 2020, 2022 in the midterms, and then last night in 2023.
I want to pick up on that thread, Quentin, because when you and your team look at election results, you can't say that there isn't disquiet in the polls. You can't say the president's not underwater in his approval rating, that people are not dissatisfied with the economy. All that is true. The polling keeps looking bad, but the election results tell a different story. How do you dissect that inside the Biden-Harris re-election campaign?
Because at the end of the day, polls can't measure what's happening here. And our campaign has been screaming that from the rooftops. Every single time one of these comes out and outlets want to report recklessly so about the numbers. I've been a part of a lot of campaigns, and one thing that I can tell you is that I've never seen a poll vote. Voters do. And I think last night Americans resoundingly stood up to vote for what they believe in, and those are about the issues that the Democratic Party is championing under President Biden's leadership, and that's what they turned out to vote. And so, look, when voters are asked to move their feet to go to the polls, they're voting Democratic. And one thing I also think that is not getting covered is, quite frankly, these polls that are saying, Trump is up, former President Trump is up on Biden. What about the candidates that Trump is endorsing? The last person that he endorsed, Daniel Cameron, lost in Georgia. He endorsed Herschel Walker, lost. His slate of candidates in the midterm, lost. So, look, if that's the debate that we want to have about this, we should also be realistic and fair about it, because when voters are asked to turn out, they're resoundingly rejecting the MAGA agenda that Republicans are putting forward in favor of the Democratic agenda under President Biden's leadership.
It's not really material to you, but I'm a huge fan of blocking and tackling in politics. I believe it matters a great deal. What has been the story in the last year for the blocking and tackling side? By that, I mean, ladies and gentlemen, voter contact, continuous contact and interaction with them, moving them to the polls, getting things taken care of, basically keeping your business in order through the entire cycle.
I think it's a great question, and my answer to that is simply by ignoring all the noise and putting in the work. I think last night we saw campaigns all across the country in the face of negative polls, negativity around their campaigns, really put in the work, and that's what our campaign is doing. We've been up early communicating with base Democratic voters, constituency voters. I'm very happy with how our campaign has come out of the gate swinging to communicate with voters who, quite frankly, are left behind when it comes to the Democratic Party messaging to them. We've put them at the forefront and made those voters that we know we have to work to have long, sustained conversations with, and we're doing just that so that when we head into 2024, we're going to be leaps beyond where the Republican Party, whoever they nominate, Donald Trump or any other Republican, is, because we are putting in the work, investing in American voters, and talking about the issues that they care about, in stark contrast to Republicans fighting to strip a woman's right to choose, fighting to give big pharma tax breaks while we're capping the cost of insulin, fighting to honestly move jobs outside of America while we're bringing jobs into America. President Biden creating 14 million jobs. So when it comes to the accomplishments and what we're talking about on the campaign, we could not be further from where the Republican Party is, and I'm extremely proud of that.
When I talk to Democrats, some of them, and they do not wish you ill, not generally, not specifically, describe the coalition as an anti-coalition, meaning they know they're rallying against Trump and what the Republican Party has become. Do you agree with that characterization, or would you describe it as an anti-coalition but with also a pro-component?
Well, I mean, I disagree with it on the face, because on one hand, if that's the case, then, you know, I think everyone is always going to have an opponent. But what voters are voting for across the country.
Well, what they think they mean by that is the biggest trigger is Trump, and Trump is a trigger by himself, and that makes this an anti-coalition more than a pro-coalition.
Look, I think that we have to look at the entire package. The entire package is where is the Democratic Party under President Biden's leadership trying to take America versus where Republicans are trying to take it. And that's clear. We are focused on lowering costs and giving tax breaks to middle-class families to make it easier. In stark contrast with Republicans, we are focused on giving people more freedoms, not less, while Republicans are hell-bent on remaining out of step with the American public when it comes to things like abortion. And that is what was on the ballot last night. And so there's noise about if this is a pro or an anti-coalition. This is about issues. And who is talking about the issues that really matter. And while Republicans are wrapped up and fighting over who's going to be their leader, or fighting if they want to raise their hand, as we'll see tonight on the debate stage, to whether they agree with Donald Trump or not, we are focused on doing the work to communicate with voters.
Very quickly, Glenn Youngkin said today the results in Virginia proved to him, as a Republican governor who lost more than he won, that Virginia is a purple state. It's not a blue state. Agree or disagree?
I think that is a statement from somebody that's very sore about what happened to them last night. What I do know is that Glenn Youngkin spent $15 million to try to rip away a woman's right to choose by gaining control of a state legislature, and he failed. I know that Glenn Youngkin spent that money to run against an agenda that President Biden has put forward on economics to lower costs for middle-class families, and failed. And so I don't know what Glenn Youngkin meant by that, but what I think he is feeling is just a little angst from defeat.
Clinton Folks, very good to see you. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
5 Republican presidential candidates are prepared to take the debate stage in Miami. Coming up, the message they're going to try to get across. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. A CBS News poll is somewhat helpfully giving us a better sense of what could happen if the Republican presidential field continues to narrow. As you know, multiple candidates have dropped out in the past few weeks. That includes former Vice President Mike Pence. CBS News Deputy Director of Elections and Data Analytics, Kabir Khanna, joins us now. So what are the numbers saying about what would happen if that narrowing trend continues?
Well, Major, as you know, we've been tracking this race for the better part of a year. So in this latest round of data collection, we decided to do something a little bit different. We, of course, first asked voters who their top choices for the Republican nomination. You can see those numbers to my right. But the next thing we did was narrow the field down to the top 4 polling candidates and ask voters to rank them from their favorite to their least favorite. What that allows us to do is see where a candidate's supporters might go if that candidate were no longer running. This is an analysis that kind of mimics ranked choice voting, which is being adopted more and more across the country. Let me show you how it plays out in the Republican field. So let's start with supporters of the lower tier of candidates. Think Tim Scott on down. Well, those supporters of those candidates tell us that their second choice is either Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley. So DeSantis and Haley each gain a few points of support if this is reduced to a 4-person race. As you can see, Ramaswamy remains in 4th place. Let's see what happens to his supporters if he's no longer running. Well, Ramaswamy voters tell us that Nikki Haley is their least favorite candidate at the moment, so she doesn't gain at all. Donald Trump gains disproportionately. He gets a few more points of support. and so does Ron DeSantis. Nikki Haley ends up staying in a distant third, even in this three-person race. It really illustrates the challenge for her at this debate and beyond to convince voters that she should be the natural alternative to Trump and that voters should coalesce around her rather than DeSantis. If Haley were no longer running, let's see what happens. Well, her voters disproportionately would back DeSantis. He is Haley's voters' clear second choice to Trump. That said, in this final round, Donald Trump ends up with about 2/3 of the support of the Republican base. So while Ron DeSantis, at least nationally, is viewed as the clear alternative to Trump by Republican voters, he has a long way to go. And he, Nikki Haley, and other challengers need to convince Republicans that Donald Trump can't win next year and that they need to start backing another horse, Major.
For the moment, they're all vying to be a distant second place. So, Kabir, what do Republicans want to hear the candidates who are on stage tonight actually talk about?
So one thing that they tell us they don't really want to hear about is abortion. Passing a national abortion ban is at the bottom of the list. I start by saying that just because it's in the news, and you can expect to hear the debate moderators ask the field about that tonight. What's top of mind for Republican voters is the economy and the border. So lowering inflation is something that nearly all Republican voters have told us over and over they want to hear about plans for, as well as stopping illegal immigration. These are also two issues on which voters, even non-Republicans, tend to trust the Republican Party more on handling, whereas abortion, the GOP is seen as increasingly out of step with the American public on. I should note that in our polling, even a good-sized chunk of Republican primary voters think the GOP is going too far on that issue, Major.
Kabir Khanna, thank you so very much. We turn now back to Miami, Florida. You know Miami's in Florida, where the 5 candidates are preparing for the 3rd Republican presidential debate. CBS News Miami investigative reporter Jim DeFede joins us. I'm always happy to talk to Jim. Jim, so you've got these 2 events in Miami. This looks like a kind of informal Florida Republican political throwdown.
It certainly does. I mean, I think what you see here is Donald Trump is not ready to cede the state of Florida to anyone. And so he's flexing a little by holding a much larger event just a half an hour from the debate site right in everyone's backyard, knowing he's probably going to get more coverage than the debate itself.
And what is the sense in Florida about the future of Governor DeSantis's presidential campaign and all the ambitions that seemed to be roiling in Florida 6 months ago, looking like he might be the alternative to Trump? Has that dissipated?
It certainly has. I mean, if you think about it, a year ago, last election, 2022, we were ready to crown, Ron DeSantis as the candidate who will be able to overtake Donald Trump and move forward. He had all the momentum on his side. Then a week ago, all we could talk about was whether or not, he had lifts in his boots. Now, the last few days have been good for Ron DeSantis, and he's certainly hoping to build on them. He got the endorsement from Kim Reynolds in Iowa. The fact that Governor Youngkin did so poorly in Virginia actually delights the Ron DeSantis camp because they see that as a victory for them because it eliminates Youngkin as a potential threat. So given everything that happened in Virginia with the Iowa endorsement, Ron DeSantis is coming in, and this is really an opportunity for him tonight to try to differentiate himself. But I'm going to tell you, Major, I realize what the polls are saying. I do expect Ron DeSantis to be tripped up somewhat on the abortion question, given that he signed a 6-week abortion ban, which does seem out of the mainstream. I think Nikki Haley will hit him on it.
The Haley-DeSantis dynamic may well prove to be the most important of the evening. Jim DeFede, thank you so much. With that little bit of an introduction, let's bring in Kristen Davidson and Kirsten Kurkowski. Kristen is the Chief Operating Officer for Ron DeSantis's Never Back Down PAC, and Kirsten is spokesperson for the Nikki Haley-backed SFA Fund Incorporated. So I will ask you both, and because your names are so well aligned with one another, you can decide for yourself which of the Kristens goes first. Is tonight's debate solely about Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis?
Go ahead. I'll go ahead first. This is Kirsten. just to clarify. So I think tonight is going to be great for Nikki. I think that she has shown the last couple of debates that she is, she's going to do what she needs to do. I think that we can expect that there's some folks on the debate stage next to her who really need to score some points, and I expect that she's going to take some incoming hits. But we have also seen from Nikki that when she's hit, she's going to hit back that much harder. So I think that it's going to be a good night for Nikki, and I think that it's going to be interesting to watch what some of the other folks on the stage who have a little bit more to lose, what they're going to be up to.
Kristen Davidson?
Yeah, I think this is a great night for. Yeah, it's a great night for Governor DeSantis. He started a great week with the endorsement of Governor Reynolds in Iowa. That's one nail in the coffin for Nikki Haley in Iowa. She was really counting on that endorsement, and to have that power and conservative voice behind Governor DeSantis in Iowa just really symbolizes the strength that we have on the ground there. I think, if we're talking about issues like, social conservatives, and especially conservatives in Iowa really care about, like the pro-life issue, Nikki Haley is not going to be able to answer to that. She's been very wishy-washy on the issue. She is pro and con, and conservatives, specifically in Iowa, don't know where she stands. And as she goes through this scrutiny and decline phase of her campaign, primary voters, caucus goers, are going to realize that right now she's coalescing the moderates, small moderates of the party, and she is not aligned with the conservative or Republican Party of 2024.
Kirsten, you want to weigh in on that Nikki Haley is not aligned with conservatives in the Republican Party?
Well, I think her standing is solidly number 2 in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. Those voters would beg to differ with that viewpoint. But I think that we're going to see her make her conservative contrast with Governor DeSantis and the others on the stage tonight. And I'm guessing she's going to come fully prepared.
And Kristen, how do you think
I'm very excited to make that contrast with,
How do you think
I'm very excited to make that contrast between Governor DeSantis and Nikki Haley. If there's a battle for who's the most conservative and who's most in line for the future of the Republican Party, Governor DeSantis is going to win that hands down, especially looking at the losses that we saw across the country from Trump-endorsed candidates last night, but people who didn't lean in and act boldly with conservative agendas, but rather relied on Trump endorsements. Really highlights the fact that Governor DeSantis was able to turn Florida red and still is the only true winner on that stage, and is still seen by the future of the party. You saw in your own numbers before that he clearly is the only one that can beat Donald Trump. And I think tonight I'm very excited to see his conservative record of conservative results go up against Nikki Haley.
Kirsten, then Kristen. So, Kirsten, how prominently do you believe the issue of abortion and the Republican Party nationally's perspective and approach to that issue will play tonight?
Well, I think it's going to be an issue. Obviously, we saw the results last night. I think Nikki's been very clear about her position on abortion. She's pro-life, but she's also realistic and wants to be a consensus builder on the issue. She's being honest with voters, and I think that's what we need right now on that issue. But I also think it's one of many issues, and I think that she's going to show her views on having a strong America right now, and obviously that is one of her strengths as a former UN ambassador. But I also think they're going to talk about rising inflation and interest rates that are preventing Americans from across the country from paying off credit card bills and buying houses. So I think you're going to see that being one of many issues that they're all going to contrast on tonight.
And very quickly, Kristen, abortion for Governor DeSantis.
Yeah, well, I'm curious to see which Nikki Haley is going to show up on abortion tonight. She's very good about moving her political stances with the wind. And so we'll see tonight if we get the more moderate Nikki Haley on abortion or the Republican primary candidate on abortion. Look, Governor DeSantis has his convictions, and he leads boldly, and he was able to turn. We're going to be in Miami-Dade County, where he was able to win in 2022, something that Republicans had not been able to do. And he didn't have to compromise on his beliefs. And so if Nikki Haley is going to offer a compromising on true core beliefs of conservatives and people of faith, then that is not going to get her very far in Iowa or beyond.
Kristen Davidson and Kirsten Krokowski, we thank you very much for your time, and good luck to both of you this evening. Tonight's debate is the first one since the war between Israel and Hamas started. Ahead, how foreign policy very well may come up on the debate stage this evening. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides, foreign policy and national security. And by that, we mean the war between Israel and Hamas, Ukraine, China, all likely to come up during tonight's Republican presidential debate. For some perspective on that, former U.S. Senator and current national chairman of the Republican Jewish Coalition, Norm Coleman, joins us now. Senator Coleman, always great to see you. Thank you very much for your time. On the Israel-Hamas conflict, what are you hoping to hear tonight on the debate stage?
Well, I think what I'm hoping to hear, what I know I'll hear, is unabridged support for Israel. There is a moral clarity in this. What happened on October 7th was brutal. It was wrong. And I think all our candidates up there understand that, and therefore will stand with Israel so that Israel has the time to do what it needs to be done to make sure that Hamas no longer exists.
And do you expect anything on the debate stage tonight, Senator Coleman, to talk about the deaths of Palestinian civilians as Israel continues to exercise what it believes is its imperative authority to not only to respond to what happened on October 7th, but to degrade Hamas's ability to attack in the future?
Yeah, Gareth, what I think it's really important that there be moral clarity. What happened on October 7th was barbarism, was savagery. Israel has to take out Hamas, and unfortunately, Hamas uses civilians as hostages, as human shields. They locate their facilities underneath hospitals, and so I think I would hope that you would hear, a heartfelt compassion for the fact that Palestinians are being used as human shields by Hamas. But there can be no stepping back from saying Israel has an absolute right to defend itself. Israel has to make sure that Hamas can no longer do the slaughter that took place on October 7th. And, Gary, I just have to say, this is the 85th anniversary of Kristallnacht, the breaking of the glass. This is the beginning of the Nazi Holocaust, where they burned temples, where they shipped 30,000 Jews to the first concentration camps. And so it's really, I think there's something kind of powerful about this event taking place on this night with what's happening in Gaza. And I would fully expect that all the Republican candidates are going to stand strong with Israel.
To pick up on the phrase you used, moral clarity, Senator Coleman, do you see the same moral clarity in the situation in Ukraine and the Biden administration's support for that government to eject the Russians who invaded?
So I do, and I must admit that there's probably some, Garrett, there is some disagreement in our party over Ukraine and the support that we should give to Ukraine. I'm just a great believer that if you let tyrants run unchecked, that in the end they come for you. I remember being in the Senate when we voted on the admission of the Baltic countries to NATO, and I had Dick Lugar, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, standing next to me and saying this was the most important moment in the life of the 7 foreign ministers that were standing in the gallery watching it. This was their guarantee that Russia would no longer take them over. And so what we're seeing now in the Ukraine is we're seeing a tyrant act, and if we don't respond to that, I think we in the end pay a price. I must admit there's greater disagreement in my party over that issue than there is over what's happened in Hamas and what's happened in Gaza and what Israel has to do to take out Hamas.
Former U.S. Senator Norm Coleman, thank you so much for your time. Our political panel will join us next to assess Tuesday's results and preview more of tonight's Republican debate. You are streaming America Decides.
From California to Kansas, Ohio to Virginia. The voters said, look, the government should not be telling a woman what to do with her body.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was, of course, Vice President Kamala Harris reacting to last night's election results. She also said Americans made it clear with their votes that they, quote, stand for freedom, unquote. Ashley Etienne and Devin O'Malley join us now. Ashley is a CBS News political contributor, former communications director for Vice President Harris, and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Devin is managing director for narrative strategies and an advisor to former Vice President Mike Pence. Devin, I want to start with you because the former vice president's no longer in this race. He identified abortion as a key issue, and yet Democrats say after the results of last night's election, that issue simply does not work in any competitive race virtually anywhere in the country. How do you respond to that?
Well, it seemed to play a prominent role in the elections of both Brian Kemp and Mike DeWine just a year or so ago.
Governors in Georgia and Ohio.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, where we saw the issue won. But if you take a step back for a moment, this is an issue, the issue of life, that Donald Trump has retreated from. He's abandoned any pro-life position that he's had. And when you're on the top of the ticket, maybe not in name, but in presence, certainly, that sends a signal to voters. And it sent a signal to voters in Ohio yesterday. I think that probably affected turnout. If you look at the 80 counties that Donald Trump won in 2020, 18 of those counties actually passed, voted to pass issue 1. And so I think that there's a real challenge there. And if you look at Virginia, Democrats outspent Republicans 9-1 on the issue. So I don't necessarily agree with the notion that abortion was on the ballot, like much of the pundits have said today.
Ashley, I know you want to jump in on that, but if I heard Devin correctly, he said Republicans weren't aggressive enough on this issue.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, you just earlier in the show showed a CBS poll that showed that Republican primary voters don't want to talk about abortion. It's at the very bottom of the list of issues. But here's the thing: it's a winning issue for Democrats. You know, regrettably, the Republican Party has decided to weaponize this issue, but it's led to the loss from the 18 midterms to where we are now. The last 3 to 4 cycles that Republicans have run on this really MAGA agenda of abortion, crime, the border. It's all a losing, what we saw last night, it's all a losing agenda. So the question I have is, how will they make these adjustments? Will they make adjustments? Will we see the candidates tonight recalibrating, how they talk about the issues? Do we find more different issues have salience versus those of abortion and crime? So that's really the question, is after last night's loss, again, 4 cycles now, the MAGA agenda has lost. Will there be any recalibration, reconsideration on the part of the Republican Party to redefine
Devin,
themselves?
recalibration, is it necessary? Or does it just be a different personality?
In Ohio, we're experiencing an off-year election that typically has lower turnout for
yeah, but it's consistent with what happened in August, too.
So
this election was run twice, the same result both times.
But again, I point you to people, so candidates and money still matters in this game. And I think that Glenn Youngkin has done a remarkable job in talking about this issue. When you're outspent 9-1 on just abortion alone, it makes it challenging. But what Glenn Youngkin was articulating is actually a common sense approach to abortion, which is to say 15 weeks is essentially pain capable. It's when babies can begin to feel pain. That is something that 66 to 70% of voters actually agree on, right? So I think Republicans, yes, I think you're right. It's not something that I think when elected, voters are saying go and make this, a top 3 priority. But that doesn't mean we fade away from the issue and we don't talk about it. I think we need to talk about it in real common sense terms and to show what the actual extremist position is.
Yeah, but actually, Governor Youngkin said this was the common sense consensus, and he not only didn't flip the state Senate, he had the House of Delegates flipped against Republicans. What does that tell you?
I mean, people are writing his political obituary right now as we speak,
It's a little too early to do that, I think, but that's...
It could be, but the reality is that he banked a lot on these issues of abortion and crime, and he came out one of the biggest losers last night as well. So, but here's the thing that I think we're missing in all of this is, I used to call Donald Trump the Teflon Don. I now believe that Joe Biden is the Teflon Don. Nothing is sticking to Joe Biden right now. I mean, he's got a phenomenal bipartisan record of big achievements. They put $30 million on, in Kentucky against him. He actually did not succeed, right? I mean, everything you can think of that they've thrown at him is not sticking right now. The voters want more and more of his agenda.
Lots of bad polls, but lots of good election results when it comes down to choosing between the agendas. That does it for now, but just for now. You're streaming CBS News.